The information provided on this podcast is for general informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your qualified health provider with any questions you may have. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. Reliance on any information provided here is solely at your own risk.
Welcome. This is Birth, Baby. Your hosts are Sierra Morgan and Samantha Kelly. Sierra is a birth doula, hypnobirthing educator, and pediatric sleep consultant.
Samantha is a birth doula, childbirth educator, and lactation counselor. Join us as we guide you through your options for your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum journey. Thank you to our listeners for your continued support. If you enjoy our content, please be sure to like, follow, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. This helps us gain visibility to other people that could benefit from listening in. Hello, everyone. Today we have Leonora Colon, our resident midwife here on Birth Baby Podcast. And she is here to talk with us about a little bit of the burnout that birth workers can experience. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Love to join you guys to talk about such an important topic.
Yeah, I think this is going to be interesting because I'm sure anyone in any sort of like professional capacity can identify somewhat with burnout, but especially in the birth worker community, which a lot of our listeners are a part of, this is a big struggle for us because our work is so all-encompassing and takes so much, not just physically and mentally, but also emotionally. And I think it really can lead to some, big deficits when it comes to burnout. So we're excited to hear a little bit about your process as you've kind of dealt with this over the years. You've been at this for a good long while now.
Yeah, been at it for a hot second. I think I've been attending births now for 17 years.
I didn't realize that. That's crazy.
I feel like this could also apply to our working moms, like birth workers for sure. But like if you are breastfeeding around the clock and then, getting up in the morning and going to work, this one's for you too.
100%.
So,
that's also, when I think about that too, I love that you brought up that perspective because people think like being a stay-at-home mom is really hard. Being a working mom is a whole new level because when you're still on overnight, like if your kid wakes up in the middle of the night or whatever, like you go to work during the day and you're depleted from that. And then you come home and you still don't even get to sleep all the way. And it's not like you can nap when your kid naps the next day because you are going to an office. So we're on call. Any on-call work can be extra taxing. And being a mom is being on call.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then there's the trifecta of like those of us who clock in at work, are shift workers, and also have kids. So like you the real ones. But yeah, like I have been at this for a hot second and definitely, my memories of attending births in my mid-20s, which was when I started attending births as a midwifery student. Like, I don't know, I was super excited to be called and, I would probably nap the next day, maybe like with the window open and the lights on and somebody in the next room using a blender. Like it was all very laid back and roommate situation, like no big deal. Now I am a freak about sleep. Like the amount of accoutrement in my home that is dedicated to my rest is truly staggering. So it definitely like will hit you at different stages in your career. And if you're just like a brand new little baby midwife, this might not be as big of an issue for you as it becomes in your 30s and definitely your 40s and beyond.
I saw something the other day that was like getting older is really just adding more things that's necessary for sleep. Like I need the sound machine, but it has to be this specific sound. I have to have this blanket because I need this weight on me.
I actually just did a TikTok video I haven't put up yet of all of the things that I have to do before I get into bed because the older you get, the more things there are. And I have a bougie 15-year-old who is also the same.
Yes. Oh my God. My 9-year-old is like riding this train with me. And I'm like, if this is how you are at 9, I'm like terrified for your future.
Oh dear. That's Gen Z or Gen A, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So, if you're at the beginning of this journey, you might not really need to think about it very much, but exhaustion is cumulative. And, if you do just continue to burn the candle from both ends, in terms of just like going to births and then just like bouncing right back and going off to teach a class, going to clinic, doing prenatal visits, there is a limitation to what your body and brain will put up with. And again, in your 30s and your 40s, it becomes much more clear to you when you have done that to yourself, when you have pushed it too hard. So, this show could give you some ideas about things that you can do proactively early on in your birth working career, or if like you've been at it for a while and you've got your own tricks, but maybe add a few extra tricks to your arsenal of how you fill that cup back up after it has been drained.
I love that because, we have Birth Baby Academy where we train other doulas, and we have a whole section on this. And I am self-admittedly pretty bad at boundaries in work and restoration of myself. We're just being honest here, transparent in who we are, realistic. And Samantha's much better at that than I am. But even still, like, she sometimes feels the effects of burnout. I do too. And putting up some sort of like protocol for us is really good. And yes, we try to instill that in newer doulas, but sometimes it takes getting to the point where you feel like you're maxed out to go, oh, okay, I see what they mean. I guess I should prioritize. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, I've been doing this for a long time and I'm still not doing this. Well, that's pretty normal. And birth workers specifically and shift workers like burn out very quickly and don't continue to do their jobs anymore because of it, because we haven't had a solid foundation of knowing how to do this. So I can't wait to hear what's in your brain.
Yeah. I read somewhere that the average amount of time that a midwife practices is around 7 years. And that's just when you're getting good. That's just when you get to the good stuff and you start to feel really confident in your skills. So we need
all that work to just burn out after 7 years.
Yeah.
Like how much time and energy you put into becoming great.
Yeah. We need our birth workers to stick around and become experienced and share that experience. And circling back, you had said you're bad about boundaries. I feel like that's a whole nother episode because there's boundaries in birth work, and then there's like actual just like rehabbing your body after hard work. But just to like dive right in, I will say that again, 17 years into it, where I am with coming home from a shift. And I'm going to usually, if I've been up all night, I'm going to be coming home around 6, 7, 8 in the morning. Because if I'm going past that point, I work with a group practice. So somebody else is going to step in and make sure that they are able to get that person delivered safely and happily and not have a burnt out, frazzled, exhausted midwife delivering that baby. So if I'm heading home at 6 or 7 or 8, first things first, safety driving home. Really, sleep deprivation is worse than consuming alcohol while you are driving. I think, I'm not saying that anybody should be drinking and driving, but it is actually much less safe to drive home after you've been up for a full 24 hours. So I know different people do different things. Sometimes my midwife sisters and I will call each other and just like, windows down, loud music, talking on the phone. Sometimes I know some people do caffeine, towards the end of their shift to like get home or whatever. Personally, for me, I'll circle back on this, but caffeine past a certain point at night does not aid my alertness or awareness or ability to get home safely and then rest. So
I've also noticed that when you're driving home, like when you first get off of a birth, especially if you completed the birth and you're like on that high with them, you might at first feel like, oh, I'm not that tired. Like I'm okay. I might even have trouble sleeping when I get home. But depending on how far away you live, all of a sudden your eyes start burning and you start feeling like this weird out of body kind of experience. And then you're like, oh, I am exhausted and I didn't realize. And I do hope that some of the people that are using birth doulas and midwives listen to this episode too, because this is why we have time limits on some people, like why we're switching out, because it is not safe for me to drive home at a certain point.
Yes. Especially if there was something that happened at that birth that spiked my adrenaline. It's like you said, I'm like, go, go, go. I'm taking care of everything. I'm making sure everybody is safe. Everybody's good. I'm good. I get in the car, I turn on the music, and then that bump, bump, bump of the road and the warm comfort of my car, I'm like, oh, shoot, I could close my eyes and fall asleep right here on Mopac, which clearly I don't want to do. So for things first, safety, whatever you need to do to get home safely. And if you know yourself and maybe you're a little bit better of a sleeper than we are, like maybe you take a parking lot nap before you drive home, or maybe you even take an Uber home, because holy shit, wouldn't you rather take an Uber than like crash your car? So food for thought. I know most of us do just power through it and get home in our own vehicles for the issue of convenience, but it's a real thing that you do need to be aware of. And then you get home. Okay, your kid wants to see you, your husband's got a bunch of questions, nobody let your dog out, the kitchen's a mess, and you just dive in. You just get in there and you start doing your thing. Wrong. No. You make yourself breakfast or dinner, whatever you want to call it. You eat a meal with protein in it. Not carbs. I mean, carbs are fine, but you really do need to get some protein in there. No coffee, a little bit of hydration. You don't want to chug a bunch of water, but you do need to fill up your tummy. And then my trick, because sometimes I'll get a little second wave of energy when I get home. My little trick of the trade is I take a super hot shower and then I get out of the shower and I let myself get really cold, like barely dry off, and I get really like shivery cold. And then I get into bed. And now we will start talking about the accoutrement of sleep for those people who have not already purchased everything that they need to get a good night's sleep. We have blackout blinds. We have white noise. We have eye shades, because the blackout blinds are still not enough. There is like a crack of light through the window and I see it and my brain tells me that it's time to think about my to-do list. Personally, I think melatonin can be really helpful, but I'm more of a like microdosing melatonin person. I think 1 milligram as soon as you can. So like the second you get home, you take it, because it does take a little while to hit your system. But if you don't like melatonin, you could do like a valerian tincture or something like that. In an absolute emergency, if it has been like a traumatic time and you are laying in bed thinking, did I do this right? Is this going to be okay? Is she going to feel okay about how that happened? Replaying things, I will sometimes resort to Benadryl. Desperate times call for desperate measures. And then your phone is off if you are allowed to turn your phone off, or at least on like do not disturb mode. So only important people can call you. And your family needs to really understand, and this is kind of a whole separate conversation, but they really need to understand that it is not okay to wake you up unless there is a fire, literally. I talk to midwives all the time and birth workers who tell me like, oh, my husband just doesn't get it. I go to bed in the morning and he's like banging around in the cabinets and turning on the blender and opening and closing the garage and what have you. And I'm like, well, I know he can't actually understand it because he's not a birth worker himself. But if you have a respectful, loving relationship with your significant other, they need to understand that everybody's quality of life is going to trickle down from the amount of sleep that you get after this birth.
Literally makes me feel like anger in my body, thinking about somebody being so disrespectful of someone's space. Like,
yes.
I don't even say goodnight to my kids if I'm still sleeping when they're going to sleep. And my husband is like, no, honey, mommy has been awake all night long. Like, so the dogs are the only thing that we can't always, control. The dogs sometimes ruin it for us. But, training our children even, like, this is a non-negotiable. Mama has to sleep.
Yep. Absolutely. It's hard, but it's also like, I feel like it's a little education for their brains to know that like mommy's a human. And while she always wants you to feel good and be happy and feel safe. Sometimes that includes a boundary for her about her own health and body. I think it's good for their brains to understand that. So that sleep, I think most of us max out around 4 to 6 hours after a 24-hour call shift. I think when I was younger, I used to like really take a good long nap or a short nap and feel fine. But now it's like, I need those 4 hours. If I can get those 4 hours, I can get up and I don't know, maybe like do a load of dishes and answer some emails. Maybe not if I'm being kind to myself. But definitely not getting up and like running errands, running around, trying to fit a full day's worth of effort into those few hours that you have before bedtime. And then when it's bedtime, there's this whole like repeat of the previous steps of like getting a good meal, taking that melatonin a few hours before bedtime and going to bed early. Because again, when you push it out, when you delay sleep, it spikes your adrenaline and your cortisol. And then you get that second wind and you're like, oh, I'm exhausted, but I'm not sleepy. And that's the worst. That's really kind of like what we're trying to avoid. And sometimes it's unavoidable. Sometimes your body just does what it's going to do. But I feel like mostly if we do all the things that we know that we can do and the people around us love us and respect us enough to, lift us up through that moment, I think it's mostly pretty possible. And like, when I was working at a quicker pace, I felt like it would take me like a week to recover from a 24-hour call shift. And now I feel like within a day or two, I feel pretty good because I'm not just like jumping right back into the thick of it the next day. I tend to like have a little bit more space and gentleness with myself. And that's really helpful.
I think that's so common for people to feel like they can only sleep a short amount of time. Sam, I know like she and I always are going like, I'll take phones, I'll do everything. Like you just go to sleep. And then the other one texts and we're like, what are you doing awake? Like my body wouldn't let me sleep anymore. Or I had to pee like for the millionth time or whatever. And then it feels like it does take days. And I think that's what people outside of this work don't understand is it can take days for us to feel back to kind of normal. And even postpartum doulas, one of the girls on our team, she's like, man, if I don't get any sleep on an overnight shift with a baby, I still don't feel right the next, the following day because of it.
It's like a hangover. Like you just like feel it for a while if you don't catch up on that. I found, kind of like you said, if I'm able to get like 4-ish hours after an on-call, being up all night with someone, and then I can get to bed decently the next, that next night, I can generally start recovering, but I still feel it in my body and it takes a while.
Yeah, absolutely. We do call it in the industry, we call it a birth hangover.
Yeah.
And I don't have a birth hangover after every birth, but I do experience birth hangovers and it's a little bit like the real thing. It's you don't feel great in your body. You're either like hungry for crap or not hungry at all. Definitely. I don't drink alcohol anymore, but I used to feel the next day like, oh, I want to like drink wine. That's going to make me feel better. And I was like, no, that's not going to do that at all. But now I do rely heavily on caffeine the next day.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's your body does need a second to recover. And there are going to be times in your life that like you are not able to treat yourself with as much respect and kindness as you should after every single birth. There's going to be times that like family emergencies come up or a pet is sick or a kid is sick or a bunch of people go into labor all at once. And that's fine. Like that's life. But if your default setting is to do all of these things and make sure that you get that sleep and do try to not push it the next day, then when you do have to push it, it's not going to feel as devastating. And that was where I was when I, for the first part of my career, I worked at a birth center for 10 years. And it was a great place, a really super fine facility, tons of great midwives working there. But the pace for me was not livable. Like a full-time load was 2 24-hour call shifts and 2 clinic days per week. So if you tally that up, that's 48 plus 8 plus 8. It's a lot of hours potentially that you could be working. And you're not always working the full load. But sometimes you do. And then sometimes you're having multiple deliveries during one shift, and you get to the point where you see the light at the end of the tunnel and somebody else comes in and you're like, whoa, like this is really doing something to my mind,
Like a
realizing
yo-yo.
turning that clock back up. So, that was a great place to get lots of experience and to make lots of connections in the community. But I will say that as I was getting towards the end of my 10 years there, I really was not feeling great about the viability of midwifery being my calling in the future. I was looking at cutting hair. I was looking at, life coaching. I was looking at household management, personal assisting. I'm like, what can I do? I've got great attention to detail. I can multitask. Like, what is it that I can do? I'm good with people. But it's like, I had spent all that time training to become a midwife, like honing my skills, making all those connections. And I was really like, gosh, it's so sad that this isn't going to work for me in my 40s. And then, lo and behold, I started my own practice with another midwife. We banded together, and now there's 3 of us. And it's incredible. You actually don't have to maintain this sort of martyr pace of just like, I have to be at every birth. I have to help every single person that asks me. You can craft a business that serves the needs of your clients, but also serves the needs of you and your family.
That's awesome. And I kind of have a follow-up question for you that I didn't tell you I was going to ask, and it actually didn't occur to me. But in the last couple of Birth Baby Academy series where we've taught the weekend workshops to folks and had new doulas come out of that, in both of them, we've had people right afterward find out they were pregnant. And they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about being pregnant while being a doula. And then they're trying to navigate, how do I be pregnant and be a doula? Or even a midwife or whatever. Do you have any advice to people who are going through this work while also being pregnant themselves?
Absolutely. I did it and I did not do it well. And it's, I will say like it was more an issue of just financially not being able to just stop working while I was pregnant. And the expectations where I was working were pretty high. Like I said, it was like somewhere in the range of 60, sometimes 70 hours was a full-time workload. So I didn't do it well. So I'll tell you what I would recommend for people who can do it better is to really take a sober look at your financial situation. And if there are things that you are spending money on that you could live without, like if you could do without, and just to like name a few, like some subscription services or some, fancier meals out or an entertainment budget, just for this finite amount of time and work less, I would recommend it. If you have a good supportive working situation where somebody can back you up and help take some of the overnight shifts off of your plate, that's going to be the most helpful. I had like really normal morning sickness, but if I did an all night shift, it was like The Exorcist, like it was so bad. And I made it work, but I think that it would have been really cool to be working less at night. And again, you're not always going to have that option to take it completely off of your plate, but if you can decrease it to the highest extent possible, that's going to be helpful. And then there's that thing that any midwife is going to tell you, which is just like eating protein steadily throughout the day. But in this case, it's more like you have to be eating some protein every hour and a half while you're awake. And that's actually, when you think about it, pretty hard. Like you need to be having like a lot of food with you, and you need to be eating at a lot of times that you don't necessarily feel like eating. But keeping your blood sugar steady is going to have a really, really great effect on nausea, on fatigue. And then, of course, getting the most amount of sleep possible. So if you're doing a night shift, do what you got to do, but then you need to be going to bed earlier the next night and really allowing yourself to get not doing the revenge bedtime, not scrolling when you get home, just really focusing on your sleep, because sleep and then blood sugars are going to have the best effect on just like the quality of your pregnancy.
I think also just like focusing really heavily on the recovery period, all the things that we were talking about at the beginning, the sleep and all of that. But even little things like something that I've started doing in the past couple of years is I've gotten a massage subscription, and I go do that after I've had a couple of births. I always say once I've had two, I'm going to sign myself up for that month's massage, and then I go in and I do that, and that's such a great recovery for my body. And I'm sure during pregnancy, that's even more important. And, also the other body work things like seeing a chiropractor and doing all of those things that help get you back into where you're feeling good and ready to keep moving on, I think is really, really important for any birth worker at any time, but especially when you're pregnant as well.
100% agree. Body work is super important. And, once you found your preferred modality, your amazing acupuncturist, like I saw when I was pregnant, shout out to Peggy Gorbani, or your perfect chiropractor or your amazing masseuse, like you need to lean in on that body support because you will need it.
Yeah. And, the team that you have around you and all of that is important. Also, like, when are you going to cut off what you're doing completely? And that's going to be a different answer for everyone. Like, how long into your pregnancy are you willing to work, or can you work? And is your want different than what you need? And then I lost my train of thought. How long and the emotional piece of this. Hello. Like, it's not just the physical aspect, it's the mental aspect. I was talking to somebody who was a doula, like I think she stopped 13 years ago or something, right after her daughter was born, because she meant to work until like 34 to 36 weeks pregnant. And she said at 32 weeks, I think it was, she attended a birth and she was like, nope, my mental state cannot handle this anymore. So she was like, I had to get coverage for the other people that I had, like, I had to put me first. And I think that we live in this world as birth workers specifically, where we're such servants to other people in a loving way, but it is extra depleting because it's not only the physical aspect, it's the mental aspect.
Absolutely. It's hard to ever say no to anyone, but it is really important to make sure that you are being honest with yourself and those around you. I was catching babies until, about 40 weeks or so. And
if you're on YouTube, you saw our faces drop. 40 weeks?
Yeah, I was allowed to be taken off of nights at 36 weeks. And I'll tell you, it was a long haul to get to that point. But then, I was like 40 weeks, and that was when my maternity leave kicked in. Side note, if you work right up until 40 weeks, you're likely to go late, which I did. But especially in my third trimester, I would attend births, and occasionally, that birth would have some intensity to it, or some, difficulty or something overwhelming about it. And I would come home and just be laying in bed thinking like, oh my gosh, in 2.5 months, like I'm going to need to think about doing that. But I leaned heavily on Spiritual Midwifery and Ina May's Guide to Birth. Both of those books are really sweet, kind of like old school homages to kind of the art of midwifery, but also just like what birthing at home, birthing out of hospital looks like. And so I would get home and I would pick it up and just like randomly open to a birth story. And then I would read that birth story, and I always felt better because what Ina May does really well is she normalizes birth. And that was my mantra when I was getting ready to give birth was, I just want a normal birth. I just want it to be normal. I just want it to progress. I just want it to be straightforward. And, fortunately, it really was all of those things for me. It was beautiful and it was spiritual and it was incredible, but it was normal. It was just the most normal thing in the world. I woke up and had contractions and ate a bowl of Raisin Bran and went into labor. And then that night I had my baby. And I just think that reading those stories really helps you to remind yourself that birth is really normal, because otherwise, how would we all be here?
Yeah, absolutely. And having those people that you can rely on and talk to as well, in addition to all of that, I think is important.
Yeah,
gotta have your team
with colleagues is super important too.
Yeah. Absolutely. Got to have the team, got to have the village. Even if you're a brand new baby doula, find some people.
I think we should have another discussion at a later date about boundaries and birth work, because I think it would pair really well with this conversation, because this is kind of like boundaries you have with yourself about like what you're willing to withstand or not withstand after doing a really hard job. And I think that it would be good to talk about also what we're willing to withstand within the context of the job itself, and how, being authentic in that piece can really bring a lot to your practice.
Oh man, we're down for that. We'll just put you on play when we do our Birth Baby Academy section.
So take it for an old pro.
So going back to the burnout piece of all of this, what things did you find when you were really starting to experience that? Like what changes were you able to make in how you practice that kind of pulled you out of that space?
I mean, just 100% the pace of my practice, the amount of clients that I was interfacing with, the amount of people that I see in a day that I'm doing clinic, the amount of days of clinic per week that I'm doing, the amount of births per month. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say that those numbers shrunk by about, I don't know, 75% or something. Now, I'm also now responsible for all of those people, their billing and their scheduling. And, I'm like basically my own medical assistant and all those things bundled up. When you become your own homeowner, there are a lot of different hats that you have to don. But just decreasing the pace made it so that I could like zoom back out and remember why midwifery is important to me, because I want birthing families to have choices, and I want them to feel empowered, and I want them to feel heard, and I want them to walk away from that experience with good memories and love. And, I feel that midwifery care is very well adapted for that, but very much more so if you have enough time to really get to know your clients and, become part of their family. You get to know their kids and their pets, and you know where they live, and you come into their home and you help them have their baby, and then you clean up and do the dishes. And it's like, it's very familial. And if you have the ability to zoom out and spend a little bit more time with your clients without having to then subtract that amount of time from yourself and your family, it feels really good.
I think finding what you're passionate about, like going back to why did you get into this field? Why are you doing, this crazy, hard, difficult thing that, kind of sucks us dry sometimes? Like, what was the heart behind that? And I think I'm thinking of Sierra and I, and how, we chose to kind of stop working solo and start working in our partnership. And that a big part of that was because we were both starting to feel a little bit of that burnout, and we wanted to take some of the stress off of that. And even now in our partnership, sometimes we still feel some of that burnout, and we have to go back to, okay, so why are we doing this? What things about this do we love? And how can we make it, so that we are doing more of that? And for some people, they don't want to be doing the paperwork and all of those things. So maybe that means they are going into a, agency or a birth center or something like that, depending what your role is. Or maybe it's doing what you did and going out on your own, so you can have a little bit more control over who you're working with. So definitely, I think thinking really, really intentionally about what affects you and what brings you joy is really important.
It's funny because when we did that, when we're like, okay, we don't want to get burned out, so let's combine forces and do this together. We were really worried that what if people don't want to hire us because we're together? Like, what if that's a turnoff to them, that they don't have one doula? And the opposite happened. When we started prioritizing not burning out, and we started explaining it to people and sharing the why behind our decision, we started attracting the clients we wanted. And our friends that don't have that same I guess that would kind of be a boundary, but the protection for themselves, they attract these clients that are just so disrespectful and don't really care about them as a human. Like they don't see them as human. And we've had so many people tell us in interviews, I actually really like it that you do it that way because, I really respect that. And that actually attracted me. And we're like, oh, okay, we not only did the right thing for us, but we're actually showing up for people better.
Yeah, sometimes it can be scary as a business owner to get too specific. You feel like if you cast a wider net that you're going to be doing better, but you're right. I mean, there's a midwife and there's a doula for each type of person. And there is that type of person that really craves that one-to-one connection and knowing that just that one person is going to be their person. But then there's a different type of person that craves knowing that the person who shows up at their birth is rested and fed and ready to support them even more so. And that's also our sweet spot as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been really helpful. And I know that other people will find value in this as well. And we'll have to have you back to talk about boundaries someday.
It's about boundaries.
Yes, I love it. It's going to be a good one. Well, thank you so much, Leo. We will talk to you soon.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you for joining us on Birth, Baby. Thanks again to Longing for Orpheus for our music. You can look him up on Spotify. Remember to leave a review, share, and follow wherever you get your podcasts. See you next week.